What is truth? TV podcast. What is truth? Let's take it to the live stream. Tell me what is truth? TV podcast. What is truth? Let's take it to the live stream.
What's up, y'all? What's up, y'all? Welcome to the What is Truth podcast. Sorry about that. It was streaming over on Odysee. I forgot to change the settings, so my apologies for that. Today should be a great show. Thank you guys for tuning in, and to all the new subscribers, thank you guys. If you guys are JFK enthusiasts, this should be a fun show and a very informative one. Mr. Cory Hughes is with me. He is a JFK researcher extraordinaire. You can find him at coryhughes.org. I've been following JFK a fair bit amount, probably more than the average Joe for sure. And Cory Hughes, in my opinion, is by far the best.
I'm the fucking goat. I'm the fucking goat. That's all there is to it.
Mr. Cory Hughes, welcome to the stream. How are you, my man?
Good.
All
Thank
right.
You
ready to rock and roll? We're gonna go over the Harvey Lee Oswald rabbit hole. Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yes.
And this is gonna be take 2 because we were streaming on Odysee. But the reason his real name was Lee Oswald, and we have all come to know him Harvey Lee Oswald because that was his full name. But
his name was Lee Harvey Oswald. So it never was the Harvey Lee Oswald, except in certain circles where people were using his name as an alias.
Yeah. So let's go over a little bit of background on the man. We, through the Freedom of Information Act and over the preceding years, several dumps have been made, and there's still several thousand documents that need to be let out and still haven't been let out. But one interesting thing is that the reason for the documents still being sealed after all these decades is because the reason we're given is national security issues. If the official story says that he was the lone gunman and he died a short time after and case was closed, why the hell do documents need to be withheld all these decades later? And so that, to me, is a clear indication that a lot of the truth has been hidden and continues to be hidden. But luckily, there are many people that have been looking at this over the years. And as I said at the very beginning, Cory Hughes is the GOAT. So give us a little bit of info. And before we start, where can people find you?
coryhughes.org.
coryhughes.org. If you are watching this on YouTube, there is his website. He has a plethora of information. So you will be captivated by the amount of knowledge this man exudes. So, my man, without further ado, let us dive into Mr. Oswald.
Sure. So Oswald killed the president single-handedly. Where you been? I mean, that's been the story for 60 years. Don't you agree?
I definitely agree, my man.
All right. So the story of Lee Harvey Oswald, and here's the thing about Oswald, is that Oswald has never been the focus of my research because the guy is a ghost. He is a ghost. Beginning around, let's just move it to a relevant time period, after he defects to the Soviet Union, right? Because there's no real indication of anything fishy in as far as the assassination itself goes prior to his defection to the Soviet Union, which happened in late 1959. And now, was there a plan to kill Kennedy in 59? No, absolutely not. Kennedy wasn't even president yet. He just won the election, hadn't taken office. But, at that time, there were people in New Orleans who had been using the name of Lee Harvey Oswald or Lee Oswald or Harvey Oswald or various combinations of such, starting around that time that he went to the Soviet Union, definitely in early 1960. And so there was some sort of a plot before the assassination to create this persona of Lee Oswald, the rabid communist, right? The violent dissident. And so I believe what we're really talking about is we're talking about two plots here. We're talking about a plot to create this Oswald character that we all know as a communist, and everything that he did, starting with his defection to the Soviet Union, was all part of a plan to paint him in this light. Now, what was the purpose of painting him in this light? He had already defected to the Soviet Union. Well, let me back up just a little bit. So, starting in 1959, right about the same time that Oswald defected, the US government, via the Central Intelligence Agency, had launched a project called AE Balcony. And AE Balcony was a project that was designed to take naturalized American citizens, right? So people who were not American who became Americans, right? They were naturalized, who spoke fluent, or what they call Baltic languages, right? So Russian or Latvian or whatever, a whole bunch of countries in that area. They wanted to take people who spoke the language fluently, who could be mistaken for being a native of that country, and then plant them in the Eastern Bloc countries and in the Soviet Union in order to recruit other people in the area. And that was called AE Balcony. Then between 1955 and 1962, there was another project called Redskin, which was the same basic premise, but they wanted to work with students, right? They wanted to have people who were in the Soviet Union for whatever reason. They wanted to have them there and as a permanent base, right? So a student, someone going to school in the Soviet Union, or someone going to school in any one of these Eastern Bloc countries, they would have a reason to be there, right? And so they thought that they could send people over to school there and then exploit them as a way to gather new information or to recruit other people to do that for them. So the timing of Oswald's defection lined up perfectly with these two programs. The Redskin program in 1960 was reorganized underneath AE Balcony. So it all fell under the umbrella of AE Balcony. Now, we don't have any evidence that Oswald was connected to these programs, but just the idea that these programs were in existence at the exact same time that Oswald had gone over there, it's too coincidental, right? And there's no such thing as coincidence when it comes to history. So the odds of Oswald was not a communist, and we'll get into reasons why he wasn't a communist, but this persona of being a communist was painted partially, I believe, to get him into the Soviet Union, because there was some stuff done when he was in the Marines that indicated that he had communist leanings, and he had subscribed to a bunch of newspapers that were communist. And so they started to create this persona in 59 before he went to the Soviet Union. Then he goes to the Soviet Union, but while he's there, they continue to have people using his name down in New Orleans. So Hoover knew about this. In early 1960, Hoover had sent a memo within the FBI stating that, hey, somebody's probably using Oswald's birth certificate, and we should figure out what exactly is going on here, because we know that he's in the Soviet Union, right? So it was a well-known plot. Hoover was in on it, obviously. He knew what was going on. And this is what, 3.5 years before, or about 2.5 years before the assassination itself. So we have two plots. We have a plot to create this persona of Oswald the communist, and then starting in early 1963, possibly late 62, the plot for Kennedy was underway. That was definitely underway before April 10th of 63. It was probably, finalized in March of 63. But on April 10th, there was the alleged shooting at General Edwin Walker's house. And Walker, he was a former general in the Army, and he was a ultra right-wing guy. He was hanging out with members of the American Nazi Party, which the American Nazi Party in 1963 was actually being funded by the ADL, believe it or not. So you have this guy who's an ex-general. He's ultra right-wing, and there's a shot taken at his house by using the Mannlicher Carcano that Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly ordered, but never really did order. And so that was the first step in creating the Oswald killed the president myth, all the way back April 10th. But also on April 10th of 63, we have the sinking of the USS Thresher, which was a nuclear submarine. It was the most advanced sub in the Navy, and it went down on April 10th, 63 also. And then after the Thresher went down, the people who were responsible for its attempted recovery were connected to the government through a guy named Guy Bannister. And Guy Bannister was allegedly one of Oswald's handlers in New Orleans. But was he really one of Oswald's handlers? I don't think so. I'm still working on that. There's a lot of, it's hard for me to explain Oswald at times because there were numerous people impersonating Oswald going back to 1960, right? So,
Yeah.
and then possibly even earlier. I'm looking into whether or not Oswald was being impersonated while he was actually in the Marines. And there's a possibility that he was. Because when it comes to Oswald, we have numerous pieces of documentation showing Oswald was everything from 5'5" to 5'11". All right, so that's not a mistake.
It's a pretty big ass range
It's
too.
a big ass range, right?
Yeah.
So the person who died, Lee Harvey Oswald, at the autopsy was found to be 5'9" tall, and that was him laying down and dead. So he was probably closer to 5'8" tall. And still, that's a hell of a stretch from 5'6" or 5'11". But there were people involved, like particularly a guy named Kerry Thornley, who would definitely have been impersonating Oswald all over the place. He was about 5'10", 5'11", and it was a pretty good possibility that some of the documents that were attributed to Oswald while he was in the Marines were actually Kerry Thornley. Kerry Thornley has been the focus of my study recently, and because I'm in the middle of writing my book, and so I'm up to Thornley. And Thornley,
Let's touch on your book.
Person.
You're about 100 pages in, right? And
Yeah.
when do you plan on launching it? And what's the name of it?
It's going to be done by July. I'm hoping to have it published by September, and it's called A Warning from History.
So to get updates on that, I would recommend going to coryhughes.org.
Yep.
And as soon as that's released, I'm sure you'll hear about it there. So stay tuned. If this is your first time hearing Cory Hughes, be ready to have your minds blown. No other way to put it. Speaking of minds blown, back to the JFK. Just kidding. Dude, there is just so much evidence when you really go into it about Oswald being intelligence. When you read the official narratives, we're getting told that this guy was a man that was mad, pushing communist propaganda, and was mad at JFK, and he wanted him dead, and he took out his anger, and then Jack Ruby was so distraught he went over there and shot him. Case closed. End of story. But when you really, really dig into it, some people will say there's fingerprints of intelligence. Some people will say there's palm prints of intelligence. However you want to look at it, there was intelligence connected to it. The aliases that we were given of Oswald, the fact that not only was he in Russia, we're told he was in Russia, in Mexico, even Japan. I just found out about the Japan connection, and you're not going to be a regular soldier, doing all these elaborate missions. I also heard him do a radio interview in August of 63 where he's talking about pushing, the communist agenda. And to me, it seems like unknowingly he was laying down, the foundation for his downfall, doing all these little side things, which appear to be, he was just following orders. I don't necessarily think he knew exactly what was going down, but it's clear he was working for other people.
Yeah, Oswald had no clue. Oswald was not involved in the assassination plot whatsoever. He was completely set up. And to be honest with you, once he came back from the Soviet Union, between that time and the assassination, I don't really have any evidence that Oswald did any of the things that we attribute to him at all whatsoever. I don't even think he worked at the book depository. So every single thing we know about Oswald is a myth that was generated by people who were intentionally impersonating Oswald to create this legend that Oswald's a communist. Um, everything, every single event, literally every event that people attribute to Oswald was not Oswald. Not in the least
What
bit.
would be the reason for him going on that? In your opinion, going on that radio station broadcast in August of '63, where he's explicitly talking about passing communist propaganda and being anti the American regime, and it's I listened to it, I was blown away. And I was trying to piece it together why he would be doing that. To me, it just seemed like he was trying to set up something, and unknowingly he was setting up his own demise. Is the way I read into it, but I'm curious to know what you think about that.
Yeah, so that was obviously another assignment. So the entire incident leading up to him being on the freaking news was most certainly, it was all planned, it was all staged, and I'll give you the long version. Okay, so to give you the long version, I'm going to have to veer off a little bit, and I'm going to explain that Oswald, like I said, Oswald didn't do any of the things that we think he did. One of the things he's supposed to have done was have gone to Mexico City, right? So he was attempting to go to Mexico City in late September of '63. He tried to get a visa to go into Cuba, but he couldn't get one. And then he ends up coming back. And then after that, he gets the job at the book depository. Well, he never went to Mexico City. It was all fiction. So what happened with Mexico City is when Oswald went to get his, and I'm going to say Oswald, even though it's obviously not Oswald. It is obviously an impersonator. So when on September 17th, Oswald allegedly goes to get his travel visa to go to Mexico City. All right. The person who got a travel visa to Mexico City immediately prior to him was a guy named William George Gaudet. Okay. Gaudet. So this guy, after having been interviewed by the FBI and everybody else, he in the beginning he denied knowing anything. It must have been coincidence, but it turns out that Gaudet worked at the International Trade Mart, and he ran a magazine called the Latin American Report, and he was a full-time CIA employee. Okay, and when you're a CIA employee and you have an office and a staff, you are light years up the ladder from people who are contract agents like Clay Shaw, David Ferry, all the people involved at the lower levels of the Central Intelligence Agency. So Gaudet was a higher up in the New Orleans Central Intelligence Agency, like circle. Okay, him getting the visa number directly before Oswald is odd because number one, everyone assumes that Oswald is CIA, and then the guy to get the travel visa immediately before him was definitely CIA. So ultimately, Gaudet, when he's interviewed later on, like in the late '70s, by a guy named Bernard Fensterwald, he kind of opens up a little bit. And he admits to Fensterwald that he knew about Oswald. He won't admit that he actually knew him personally, but he admits that he had seen him around. And then he goes on to explain how he knew that Oswald was connected with Guy Bannister and connected with Sergio Arcacha Smith, David Ferry, and a whole bunch of these guys. And ultimately, what it comes down to is I believe that Gaudet was the person who was the Central Intelligence Agency employee who was charged with keeping tabs on Oswald. All right. So the idea that he would get his travel visa immediately prior to Oswald becomes less coincidence and more conspiracy, right? So Gaudet, the day that Oswald is seen handing out the flyers on in New Orleans in front of the Trade Mart, on that day, the series of events that led to Oswald getting on the news was that Gaudet sees Oswald handing out the flyers on, I forget what street it is. I think it was Camp Street, directly in front of the International Trade Mart where his office is set up. So he sees Oswald handing out these flyers. He then calls a guy named Jesse Core, Core. And Jesse Core is the top PR guy at the Trade Mart, good friends of Clay Shaw, who was running the Trade Mart, which is a creature of the CIA and the Mossad, right? So Clay Shaw has extensive connections to the Israeli Mossad. And it all was kind of, they were all working together in this building that was ultimately owned by Permandex, run by the CIA in New Orleans, called the International Trade Mart. So you have Jesse Core, who's the head PR guy at the Trade Mart, good friends with Clay Shaw. He calls a guy named John Corporan, who was the news director at WDSU Television. All right. So WDSU Television sends a camera crew down there, and they catch Lee Harvey Oswald on the street handing out these flyers. They don't interview him then, but they just film him handing out the flyers. And you can tell that Oswald is getting frustrated when he's handing out these flyers. People don't want to take them, or people take them and just drop them on the ground. But the reality is that entire incident where Oswald was caught handing out the flyers is a staged event. It was one of many staged events in this long theatrical production known as the Kennedy assassination. So Gaudet is the guy who actually, besides getting his travel visa to Mexico City on September 17th, he's also the one who initiated the chain of events that would ultimately result in Lee Harvey Oswald getting on television. Now, shortly after that incident where he is on television handing out the flyers, he makes contact with a guy named Carlos Bernier. Carlos Bernier is one of these anti-Castro Cuban guys, and Oswald allegedly goes to him and says, "Hey, I was in the Marines. I want to help with the cause, and so we should get together." And so a couple of days after he meets with Carlos Bernier sees him on the street handing out the Fair Play for Cuba Committee flyers. And in seeing him handing out those flyers, he gets angry and he confronts him and he says, "People don't take this. This is communist propaganda." And so there's like a disturbance, and the cops come and everyone gets arrested. Okay. So when the cops come, they scoop everyone up, and they later tell their superiors, and then it comes out into the FBI files, that they believe the entire incident with Bernier was staged. Right? It was a staged event, and the cops were telling investigators this. They were telling them, this just didn't seem right. You know, these two guys knew each other. One day he's going to Bernier saying he's going to help fight communism, but then he's caught handing out these communist leaflets on the street. So the police didn't buy the story, which is awesome, because it was true. It was not a real incident. It was completely manufactured. And then from that incident with Bernier, they are then put on WDSU television, where Bernier and Oswald have not a debate, but they kind of talk back and forth. And this by this point, this is the third time that Oswald's been on television. Okay, so they put Oswald on TV 2 times leading up to this. And when you look at WDSU, I believe it was like a CBS affiliate. There was a guy working in New York named Walter Sheridan. But Walter Sheridan, for that summer, had been down in New Orleans at WDSU TV as kind of like, he went there for, I don't know, whenever a news agency sends their people out somewhere. And that's exactly what they did with Walter Sheridan. But Walter Sheridan was a lifelong CIA agent, and he had an associate named Kerry Thornley. Okay, so Kerry Thornley was a guy who in 1959 met Lee Harvey Oswald in the Marines. It just so happens that Kerry Thornley gets moved around to 3 different locations while he's in the Marines that Oswald is also at. So I believe that Kerry Thornley got picked up by CIA very early on in his military career in 58 or 59. And one of his first assignments was to keep tabs on Lee Harvey Oswald, who they were going to be creating this communist persona for, in order to create this idea that he
do you
was
need
a
to share
communist.
stream? Do you want me to share stream? Or
No, I don't need to do that yet.
Oh, okay.
I don't have anything to share yet.
Sorry, man. All right.
I'm just talking.
No, I didn't want to interrupt. I just wasn't sure if you were gonna share screen or not. Yeah, man. The whole thing is, it's such a giant web, man.
And so explaining it is difficult because there's so many things you have to go back and explain to make sure.
How the hell do you remember all these goddamn names? Is what I wanted to ask you.
I don't know.
There's so many names in this, and you know everyone, man. What the fuck?
I think this is just my calling in life. Like, once I got into Canada research, it all just started to stick. It all makes sense, and I can see the puzzle in its entirety.
Yeah.
Most people can't. Most people can't see the puzzle. Most people can see the individual pieces, and they're like, well, this piece doesn't match to this piece. And I'm like, well, yes, it does, if you include these pieces, right? And so the hardest thing about Kennedy is coming to understand the concept of tradecraft and what spies actually do, all right?
Right.
Spies are out there to create false realities. They create fictional notions that people then absorb, right? It all goes back to plausible deniability, right? So um, everything involved in tradecraft, which is like the use of body doubles and aliases and dead drops and all this stuff, right? This is just what spies do. It's their modus operandi.
Yeah.
And so people don't really incorporate the idea. When you tell people that there were duplicate Oswalds and people impersonating Oswald, they look at you like you're fucking crazy. And it just goes to show how absolutely naive the American people and the world really are. They don't understand the ins and outs of the intelligence community, which is why I studied the intelligence community before I ever got into Oswald, right? So before I got into studying Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald and all this stuff, I had already gone through all of World War II, the creation of the OSS and the Office of the Coordinator of Information. And I came to understand spycraft and tradecraft very well before I even started with Kennedy. So I knew what they were capable of. I mean, and I got to say, I mean, you can't really understand Kennedy unless you go and you understand all of World War II and understand like how they faked most of the stuff that was involved in that, thing we can't mention about World War II.
Yeah. For more information on that, definitely go to coryhughes.org, or Cory and I have done other podcasts. So you just go down the podcast episodes on my list where we've done them, and we've gone more into detail on this platform. Unfortunately, we can't go too much in there, but there's a lot of stuff. And what I will tell you, some of the stuff you hear will upset you, but once you realize that pretty much everything we've been told, you have to re-examine, because nothing is what it seems at the end of the day. And a lot of times we just hear snippets of things and we take that as fact. But it's not until you really, really dig into any of these subject matters that you start to recognize what the actual truth is. And if it's not the complete truth, at least closer to the truth than what we've ever been told or given to. So for more information, the best resource is coryhughes.org.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of videos on there covering World War II and stuff, and those are like essential viewing before you even attempt to get into Kennedy, because this is the biggest problem I have with virtually every Kennedy researcher on the fucking planet, is that they start with November 22nd, 1963. That is their jump off point, and they completely ignore the previous 100 years of history that led to that moment. And so yeah, it's really frustrating because I don't understand how you can understand Kennedy if you don't understand the real causes of World War I and World War II and like the 50 years that led to those wars, like, so if you don't understand the last like 120 years of history, starting like from today, if you don't go back to like at least 1897, you don't understand nothing. Like the world must be a big fucking mystery to everybody, because you come to understand like the development of the intelligence world and that and their techniques, and you come to understand that they fucking lie about everything and they have ways to cover for their lies, and without understanding that, Kennedy will never make sense, because there are times when you have Oswald in 3 places at once, literally. On September 26th, Oswald is alleged to have crossed into Mexico City, but he's also alleged to have been in Dallas meeting with a woman named Sylvia Odio, and I have the absolute proof of where he really was, which was in New Orleans, where he closed out his P.O. box and left a forwarding address to Dallas, right?
So there's no chance that he was a shapeshifter?
I give it less than 1%.
I'm just teasing. No, man, that's the biggest thing right there. When the dates don't add up, there's no possible way that this guy was in all these locations at the same time. And so that's the easiest way to tell that there was many aliases being used for the same guy that apparently did all this by himself. So that's the biggest dead giveaway.
Yeah, without question. But when you listen to some of these, JFK conspiracy debunkers, like there's one in particular named Fred Litwin. If anyone wants a real fucking chuckle, they should read his book. It's called On the Trail of Delusion. This guy is the dumbest motherfucker on planet Earth. Like when you read his book, it becomes apparent that, and it also becomes apparent for most Kennedy researchers, that they don't understand the very fundamentals of the investigative process. So I was a cop for almost 9 years. I got a stack of degrees, all in law enforcement. I have thousands of hours of training in investigations and crime scene technology and all kinds of stuff. And it's like, these dumb schmucks like come from whatever other background and then hop right in and then think they're gonna figure anything out, and it's impossible. The biggest thing is like how to weigh evidence, right? How do you judge that one person's statement is more valuable than another person's conflicting statement, right? So when you learn the investigative process and you learn the relevance of various pieces of evidence, it becomes much easier to be able to say, well, that person's lying and this person's telling the truth. Whereas some of these Kennedy debunkers will be like, well, this person contradicted them, so you can't be correct. And it's like, no, man, you don't understand. It's like, it's like I just want to like smack my fucking head and be like, holy shit, these people don't know what they're doing. And that's I can say about the vast majority of Kennedy researchers, that they're not really investigators per se. What they are they're reporters. They'll dig up some data and they'll release that data, and they won't make any attempts to connect any dots. And that is where the biggest fail is with the vast majority of Kennedy researchers. They just don't understand the fundamentals. And if you don't understand the fundamentals, you're never going to figure out who was on the knoll or how many rifles there were or any of that stuff. They'll look at everyone's had the same data points that I had when I got started, and nobody's been able to make any sense of them. That's because the scope of their research isn't broad enough. And so, all right, I'm going to stop bitching about the Kennedy researchers because they all suck. All right. So the vast majority of them, even guys who I really respect, like Hank Albarelli, who just died. Hank Albarelli wrote a couple books on Kennedy. And while he didn't come to any really impactful conclusions, the data that he extracted from the world was just stunning. Absolutely stunning. Hank Albarelli has a new book called Coup in Dallas, his final book. And once again, he attempted to put the blame for the shooting on a bunch of Corsican assassins. And I understand why he came to that conclusion, but he was wrong. He wasn't seeing a bigger picture. So yeah, like the vast majority of Kennedy researchers just don't understand where to start from to come to any rational conclusions. And they'll never understand how there could be 3 Lee Harvey Oswalds, you know, in 3 different places, all documented on the same day, and how to decipher which one was the real one. So yeah, that's a big part of my frustration, is that I've come to a lot of conclusions. I've made at least a dozen original discoveries in Kennedy, which helped me connect a whole lot of dots that have been out there seemingly for 50, 60 years that no one else could, particularly when it came to like the Winterland Ice Arena and David Ferry and his alleged alibi. So yeah, it gets really frustrating for me because it doesn't seem like there are too many other people out there who've been able to make some of the conclusions. And some of the conclusions I'm 100% sure of, like some of these researchers will fight to the death to oppose. Like the fact that David Ferry was in Dallas, and David Ferry was one of 2 shooters on the grassy knoll.
So
right?
Real quick, who was David Ferry? Because that's a name that people need to know. He's a big part of the whole JFK assassination. So just briefly, if you can tell us who Mr. Ferry was.
Yeah, so David Ferry was a pilot for Eastern Airlines, okay, for about 10 years leading up to about 1962. So he got hired in, I think, 51 or 52. And he was most certainly a CIA agent. He was also a pedophile, and he had gotten in trouble numerous times throughout his life for inappropriate behavior with teenage boys. And he was certainly a close associate of Clay Shaw, and he was the central figure, in my opinion, and from the data I've collected, he was the central figure in organizing the shooters on November 22nd, and he was one of them in Dallas, where he shot Kennedy in the throat. The very first shot that hit Kennedy in the throat, that was from David Ferry. David Ferry he's a real fascinating character, and a couple of books have been written about him, but they all suck. One day maybe I'll write the definitive book on David Ferry, but he was most certainly involved in human trafficking. The CAP, the Civil Air Patrol, which is where he was photographed in 1955 with Oswald and a bunch of other kids at the Civil Air Patrol barbecue. He definitely knew Oswald going back to 55, and he was probably one of Oswald's handlers in 62 and 63 leading up to the assassination. But he was a real funny looking guy. So many people think that he had alopecia and he didn't have any hair. So he would paint on his eyebrows, right? And
did
he would
Will
wear
Smith
wigs.
smack him?
No. But David Ferry was not a Corsican. So it says that in the chat. I'm just pointing that out. But David Ferry had no hair, and he had a very unique appearance. It was all people were always able to pick him out of a crowd because he painted his eyebrows on and he wore wigs because he couldn't grow hair. All right, all of his hair fell out by around 1960, 61. People will argue with me over why his hair fell out. They say he had alopecia, which causes your hair to fall out, but that's a genetic disease. No one in his family had alopecia. Uh, David Ferry was most certainly one of the early U-2 pilots, or at least the U-2 test pilot. And the U-2 pilots, they had to wear special pressurized suits that applied like 3 or 4 pounds of pressure to the skin, and it caused all of the original U-2 pilots to lose all their hair and never to be able to grow it back. So I'm under the belief that Ferry was that deep in the CIA that he was a U-2 test pilot. I also have evidence going back to like 1947 that Clay Shaw was running operations out of Venice, Florida, attempting to infiltrate Cuba under Batista or whoever was in power then. It's not really part of my research, but way back then, they were trying to run raids into Cuba and other places. Clay Shaw organized that out of an airport in Venice, Florida. And witnesses say that David Ferry was one of his pilots all the way back then. So yeah, Ferry's connection to the CIA, he's probably more than just a contract agent. He's probably a one-time employee going all the way back to 47. So that's who David Ferry is. David Ferry is like one of, if I had to say who are the most important people in the assassination, if I had to give you a list of the top 5, David Ferry would probably be number 2 or 3 on that list. And so, yeah, extremely important. And so the official story says that David Ferry did not go to Dallas. He wasn't involved in the assassination. And that the day of the assassination in the evening, around 6 o'clock, he leaves from New Orleans. And then he drives to Houston, Texas, where he arrives 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Him and 2 companions who were identified as Melvin Coffey and Alvin Bobouf, they allegedly the next day go to the Winterland Ice Arena where the pair or the trio go ice skating, right? So after that, they go to Galveston, Texas, and then they kind of meander their way home until they get back to New Orleans on Sunday evening, right? So the day that Kennedy gets killed, he allegedly drives to Houston through a rainstorm, all to go ice skating, and then they just make their way home like it was some sort of leisurely trip. Well, that trip in itself never actually happened, and David Ferry was most certainly in Dallas. And so the story about the Winterland Ice Rink was really a cover story for him to provide an alibi while he was hiding out in Hammond, Louisiana the whole weekend, right? So David Ferry is one of the shooters of Kennedy. He is then one of the shooters of J.D. Tippit, the police officer who gets killed about an hour and a half later from Kennedy. And after he kills Tippit, he hides out in a safe house, and then he ends up driving to Hammond, Louisiana that night. But the official story doesn't mention any of that stuff, even though the FBI documents clearly indicate he was hiding out in Hammond, Louisiana all weekend. So that's who David Ferry is. The relationship with Oswald, definitely, there's a photograph of him with Oswald at the barbecue at Civil Air Patrol, 1955. That's legit. But some people say that he was in contact with Oswald when Oswald came back to New Orleans. That I'm still working on because I'm trying to work my way through figuring out which appearances of Lee Harvey Oswald were actually Oswald and which ones were impersonators like Kerry Thornley. And there was another one in particular named William Seymour. Kerry Thornley and William Seymour comprise 90+% of the Oswald sightings that we currently know about. So there were a couple other miscellaneous ones. A guy named Larry Crawford had impersonated Oswald at a place called the Texas Employment Commission where he attempted to get work. But Larry Crawford was identified by the woman that he met with, whose name was Laura Cottrell. She identified Larry Crawford as the man who came in saying he was Lee Harvey Oswald, and this was on October 4th in Dallas. So you're talking, people impersonating Oswald, outside being Kerry Thornley and William Seymour, but the vast majority of incidents that we know about involving Oswald were either Kerry Thornley or William Seymour. These two guys are, in my opinion, are directly responsible for creating the Oswald myth. Obviously, they're CIA agents. They have handlers who tell them what to do. So they weren't behind the plotting of that. But I believe that Gaudet, who I've already connected to the trip to Mexico City via the travel visa, and the incident that ended up with Oswald appearing on WDSU television. That was handled by Gaudet, unquestionably. Gaudet was directly connected to Clay Shaw and Jesse Core, and I believe that's kind of how the handling of Oswald went. You had people who were directly involved with Oswald, then you had people who just observed him from a distance and orchestrated his actions, and Gaudet was certainly one of them. But yeah, I hope I answered your question.
You sure did.
You see, it's complicated. You can't ask me a simple question without getting an hour-long response, because that's how complicated this thing is. Yeah, and that's another thing I want to comment. When you talk to people and try to explain to them how complicated it is, they don't even believe that, right? They just don't buy that either. And so it's almost anyone who thinks that Oswald had anything to do with the assassination, to me, just doesn't have a fucking idea what they're talking about. They don't understand the last 100 years of history. They definitely don't understand that there was a program in place to defect people to the Soviet Union ongoing by the CIA while Oswald was there, right? Like, to them, this is all coincidence.
Yeah, and I was in that camp for a while that, I never thought, not for 1 second did I think Lee Oswald did this by himself, but I had been of the mindset that he knew about this and was involved in it. I still believe he was involved in it, but he had no knowledge of what he was doing to help, this conspiracy happen. And one of the biggest smoking guns for this is the fact that he was arrested at the damn theater. Someone that just assassinated the president and allegedly assassinated Officer Tippit, then just happens to go and watch a movie. Get the F out of here, man. That is one of the most ridiculous things. if anything, that's... I'm sorry. God damn.
We're hitting that weed.
Yeah. If anything, that's more of a sign that he had no freaking idea of what was happening. If you knew all this stuff was going on, the last thing you're going to do is go watch a movie and hang out at the movie theaters and pull in a Pee Wee Herman, if you will. But, that's what the official narrative wants us to believe and digest.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the Texas Theater a little, because that's a hilarious incident. So allegedly, and we'll get to Tippit at some point, but we'll jump to the Texas Theater for now. So Oswald is alleged to have killed J.D. Tippit at 1:16 p.m., and then he makes his way to the Texas Theater, where he enters at 1:36 p.m. That is a complete fiction. Oswald was actually entering the Texas Theater at exactly the same time or just prior to Tippit getting shot, and Tippit got shot at 1:06 p.m. All right. So, so Oswald's in there at 1:06. He buys a ticket. He doesn't walk in like the official story says and not buy a ticket. He buys a ticket, and then he goes up to the balcony. And the balcony, it's a pretty big theater. There's 900 seats in this theater. It's got a second layer, and he goes up to the balcony, and he looks around, and then he comes back down a minute or two later. He then walks out into the theater, where out of his 900 seats, there's only about 22 people there. So he goes and he sits directly next to a guy. I don't recall the guy's name offhand, but he sits directly next to him. And this guy is like, what is this dude's problem? Why there's 900 seats here? Why is this guy sitting right next to me? And so then Oswald gets up and he goes and he does it again. He sits directly next to another person. And then he does this 2 or 3 times, sitting next to somebody and then getting up and leaving from there. And then ultimately he ends up sitting next to a pregnant woman. So I'm trying to figure out who the pregnant woman was. It was not Marina. There was another pregnant woman named Sandra Moffat, based out of New Orleans, who was in this circle, but she gave birth in August. Marina gave birth in late October. So it was neither of them. So Oswald goes and sits next to a pregnant woman. They talk for a minute or two, and then both of them get up and leave to go to the lobby. The woman then walks out the door, leaves, never to be heard from again. And then you have Oswald, who then goes to the candy counter and he buys a thing of popcorn from Butch Burroughs, the manager. Butch Burroughs attests that he sold Oswald popcorn at 1:15 p.m., although that's squashed from his statements in the original story, right? Oswald then takes his popcorn, goes back into the movie theater, and he sits there for 35 fucking minutes eating popcorn, watching a movie. and then they rush in and they arrest him. So
I've heard that that kind of points more towards, you know, towards the intelligence aspect, that, you know, it was more likely that he went into that theater and gave a nod, you know, like a little secret nod and whatever to that person that he sat next to. They didn't speak any words. It was kind of like a silent communication type of deal. What do you have to say about that?
Well, when Oswald got arrested, he had two half-dollar bills in his pocket, two different dollar bills that were cut in half. He had one half of each one. Okay, this is a CIA technique. So if you don't know who your handler is, but you got, you know, you go sit next to them, and you have one half of the dollar, they have the other half of the dollar, and that's how you know who you have, that you have the right person, right? So.
Right.
When Oswald's arrested, he had two of those in his pocket. He had two one-half-dollar bills to two different dollars. So, right? So obviously Oswald had been meeting with people who he didn't know who were handling him. He talks to her about something. Witnesses said that he spoke to the woman in the theater, and then the two of them went back to the lobby, and she left. Who she is, I'm still working on. I haven't come across another pregnant woman, although that week, a pregnant woman was seen at Ruth Payne's house, and Ruth Payne was CIA. She was the one taking care of Marina, who was most certainly a double agent, and she was definitely in on the setup. All the people who Oswald associated with in Dallas, meaning Michael and Ruth Payne and George de Mohrenschildt, they were all Central Intelligence Agency, definitely. They all have deep, long connections to the CIA, especially George de Mohrenschildt. And a lot of the testimony they gave to incriminate Oswald was completely part of a script. George de Mohrenschildt says that he saw the rifle at Oswald's house, but Oswald never ordered that rifle, so he couldn't have, so he was lying there. We have Marina, who forged Oswald's signature on a bunch of stuff, and she got busted through handwriting analysis. So yeah, like everyone who was in Dallas who knew Oswald was in on the setup. It's almost like he was completely clueless. And let me jump forward to later on. I don't even believe that he worked at the book depository. I don't have any evidence he worked there. It was a CIA front. There was three guys in charge there: O.V. Campbell, Roy Truly, and William Shelley. All three of them were OSS in World War II. All of them worked in CIA publishing, because the CIA controls the textbook industry in this country. If you think that the CIA is going to trust some Joe Schmo company to write textbooks and get them into schools, you're fucking kidding yourself. The narrative begins with brainwashing our kids in school. Thus, all propaganda is handled by a central entity, which is the CIA. And therefore, the CIA controls the textbook industry. All the companies that were in that building, which were like Macmillan Company, Scott Forsman, Southeastern Publishing, these were all CIA companies that were involved in publishing textbooks. And the book depository itself, the Texas School Book Depository, that company in particular, run by three guys who were former OSS. Yeah, that was a CIA front the whole time.
And not only that, one of the things that you brought up and made me think about a lot of that, what you're just pointing to, is how the statements from the witnesses were very militaristic. You know, can you give us an example of what their statements were like?
Yeah, sure. So first off, about half the employees of that building had never seen Oswald before he was on television. They never saw him at the building. Oswald's boss, O.V. Campbell, who was the vice president of the book depository, he was the top guy in that building, and he never saw Oswald before Oswald was on television. Virtually every one of the people who gave a statement, the statements were obviously coached by Dallas police or FBI. See, when you read the statements in the Dallas police files, they're all very similar. They all contain the same very specific information. But then when you read the FBI re-interview of these people, they start to vary a little bit. And then when you read independent researchers who went to interview these people years later, their statements are totally different, right? So you've got like different phases of these people's statements, going from Dallas Police Department to the FBI to independent researchers, where the stories completely change. It's really interesting because you'll find a weird contradiction in Kennedy. You'll find that some people give statements in the beginning that are obviously very truthful because they're providing information that they wouldn't understand the relevance of. And then over the years, their information got censored. But then you have other people whose information was censored right off the bat, who over the years, more information starts to come out. So you have this kind of duality in various witnesses, going from censored to truthful, and others going from truthful to censored. It's really strange. But ultimately, being that was a CIA front, a large portion of the people who gave statements about where they were at the time of the assassination, they used the phrase repeatedly, I took up a position. The motorcade was coming, so I took up a position over here. I took up a position by the light pole. That's not how regular people talk, okay?
Yeah.
Regular people don't say, I took up a position. That's military speak. And so, yeah, to me, that was like the absolute proof that everybody in that building was former military. And, they were definitely working for the CIA because it was textbook industry. And then when you actually come to figure out the actions of the people in that building, you can tell that most of the secretaries who worked there, most of the women in those buildings, were not in on the plot because they gave information that conflicted with other information that you can tell was, part of a stage story.
Didn't
And
one
then
of them go on to NASA?
that you're talking, no, that's something different. We'll get to that also, but
Okay.
I'll just touch on the NASA connection really quickly. NASA was a CIA front for most of their existence in the early 1970s, most certainly. When you look at Oswald's jobs, Oswald, he had a whole bunch of jobs, allegedly. I don't think he ever worked at any of those places that he's attributed to have worked in. I think they were all CIA fronts. And when you look at one, there was one in particular, Riley Coffee Company in New Orleans. The Riley Coffee Company had, prior to Oswald, they had 4 employees who left there to go work at either NASA directly or Lockheed or Boeing or some of these other contractors, right? But I would say that none of these people actually went to go work for these aerospace companies, because the aerospace industry and all the companies attached to it were all involved with the Central Intelligence Agency, and these guys needed front jobs, right? So everyone who works for the CIA needs a fucking job where they can show your business card, they can say, hey, this is my office, but they never show up there, right? The money goes from the CIA to these front companies, even like Boeing and Lockheed, which are real companies. They'll put people on the payroll, and give them a paycheck, but that money is coming from the CIA to them, to that person, to give them like a legitimate job where they can pay taxes and all that stuff while they're out doing other things for the CIA. That's how front jobs work. Like a whole bunch of guys who were definitely shooters in the assassination, their front jobs, said no, they were working here. They couldn't have done it because they were working here at that day, right? But of course they're lying, because they're that close to the CIA. Like Riley Coffee, the guy who had owned Riley Coffee was a former CIA employee, right? So that's kind of how this thing works. If people understood the depths of which the CIA has infiltrated American corporations, like, it'd blow your fucking mind. Like, there is no company that you've ever heard of, from Home Depot all the way to Twitter, that doesn't have CIA employees working there, right? So it's kind of nuts. But yeah, so that was the NASA connection. The NASA connection is that it was a CIA front for many years, and so none of the people who say they went to work for NASA or connected to Kennedy actually went and worked for NASA. It was all CIA front stuff.
Yeah.
But especially the book depository, especially like publishing was huge, because publishing is the root of propaganda. Like the CIA in the 50s and 60s and 70s had so many magazines, like Time magazine, right? Time Life magazine. That was CIA from day one, run by a guy named C.D. Jackson. And C.D. Jackson was the number 2 guy in the OSS Psych Warfare Division under General McClure. And he was one of 2 people who faked all the stuff at Buchenwald, all the lampshades of human skin and like the shrunken heads. Like, those have all been proven to be fake. That was all a direct result of the work of C.D. Jackson, who C.D. Jackson was running Time Life magazine in 1963. And he is also the guy who took possession of the original Zapruder film, right? So he goes down and he buys the Zapruder film. So instead of the CIA saying, nope, that's ours, and confiscating it, they used Time Life magazine as a front to buy the Zapruder film, which then the Zapruder film did in fact make it to the CIA the very next day, on Saturday after the assassination. But they deny all claims to this. They say that they never saw the film until the 70s. Give me a break. Do you think the CIA is not going to confiscate that on day one? No, they allegedly allowed the publisher of Time Life magazine to confiscate it. And then the authorities were like, well, we don't have a copy. What the fuck? If anyone believes that, I got a bridge to sell you. So yeah, so even going back to the book depository, that was everything that you think you know about Lee Harvey Oswald, the people he interacted with, the places he worked. I mean, every single person who's ever talked to Oswald is directly connected to the CIA, which told me that he was just being handled, right? He was just being handled, and I think honestly, for the most part, he was kept out of New Orleans at times, and he was kept out of Dallas at times on assignment by his handlers to allow the people who set him up to go in and impersonate him in various places. And that's kind of how it was. I cannot trace any actions of the real Oswald, with the very few exceptions, like the incident at the post office with his leaving his forwarding address and stuff on the 26th of September. That, I believe, is the real Oswald, because they tried to suppress that information very heavily while he was allegedly in Mexico City. But none of the things that people attribute to Oswald did Oswald actually do. I think that he was most certainly being kept out of those areas in order for them to set him up. And I can't really trace any major actions of his until he shows up at the Texas Theater, right? Which is where he's ultimately arrested. So I kind of envisioned this guy who didn't have a clue what was going on with the assassination of the president, didn't know anything. I think there's some ideas that perhaps he was involved in working with the CIA and the FBI as an atomic agent, right? He's been shown to have been signed in at the Atomic Energy Museum in Virginia at a time when he was supposed to have been at work with a perfect attendance record at the book depository. So there's another incident where a pregnant woman and an old lady, possibly Marina and Marguerite Oswald, got a tour of one of the atomic facilities, a public tour of one of the, and that their signatures are on the paperwork. So there's something going on with Oswald and nuclear reactors, which is kind of a weird coincidence. And I don't really attribute much to coincidence, but the entire assassination was over the fact that the Israelis were building an atomic reactor in the middle of the Negev Desert in Israel, right? And so that's ultimately why Kennedy got killed. Kennedy was going to shut them down and pull all funding, and he was going to ensure that Israel was never a nuclear power. That is why they killed him.
And dismantle the CIA. I mean, there's so many reasons.
Well, you have superfluous reasons, and then you have like the core reasons. And the biggest thing is that the Israelis were not going to put up with this little punk kid, is kind of how they saw him, who just became president, to foil their plot to have a nuclear reactor, which was ultimately part of their plan to take over the world, which has been underway since 1897. So
what are your thoughts on a lady came out claiming that she was Lee Oswald's mistress?
She is the most full of shit person on the planet.
Okay.
I
wanted to ask you about
fucking
that.
head cut off. Like, you're talking about Judith Baker, right? Judith Very Baker or something like that. Like, she's a fraud. She's a person who inserted herself in the story. Everything she's ever told anybody was already out there somewhere, right? She created this story based on information that was already in the public realm. Like, fuck that chick. Like, her shit conflicts all over the place.
The only reason I brought her up is she claims that Lee called her up the day before saying that something real big and bad was going to happen and blah blah blah, and that definitely raises eyebrows, but I just thought I'd bring it up. Wanted to see what your take on it was.
Yeah, so she was in that documentary series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy. The Men Who Killed Kennedy, while it does have some really good stuff in there, it's mostly a propaganda series, which was, in part crafted by Jack Valenti, who was in on the creation of the JFK movie. And the JFK movie, if anyone thinks that that's like a legit film, it's not. The executive producer, the guy who bankrolled that film, was a guy named Arnon Milchan, who it later came out was a Mossad spy the whole time. Basically, Arnon Milchan in the 1950s and 60s owned a company called, it had his name in it, Milchan Co. or something like that. And he had an employee working for him named Benjamin Netanyahu. Maybe you've heard of him. But both of these guys were working in America at this company owned by Arnon Milchan, and they were basically purchasing the parts for and smuggling out of the country the triggers for nuclear reactors, right? So they were basically gathering parts and the various pieces needed to assemble nuclear triggers. That's what Arnon Milchan did. He's a fucking Mossad guy all day long for his whole career. And after he kind of got out of that aspect of working with intelligence, he ended up going to Hollywood, where he bankrolled a bunch of movies, working with Oliver Stone. So the JFK movie and Oliver Stone, I have no fucking respect for. They're propagandists. Don't get me wrong, it's a great film. It's an entertaining film, and got people spinning in a whole bunch of directions that were completely worthless. And fuck that guy. Like, seriously. Fuck Oliver Stone, and fuck Arnon Milchan. And those are the people
And
responsible
Uncle Terry.
for these things. Who?
Uncle Terry.
Who the fuck's
Wait.
Uncle Terry?
It's a cancel culture
Ah,
warrior. Yeah. Funny quick story. This Uncle Terry character made a video the other day, and Cory Hughes is the biggest bigot on the interwebs. Just because they found out that we were going to be doing a show together.
oh, that's interesting. I wish somebody would say that shit to my face.
Yeah. But I'll send you the link later.
Cool.
But
Awesome. I'll troll this person to death.
yeah, please do. It pleases me to hear that. So one interesting revelation that I came across, that I ran it by you earlier today, was how there was a woman by the name of Alvita Trion. She was working the switchboards at the police station where Lee Oswald was being held, and she was supposed to be recording the conversation with Lee. He was going to be making a phone call, which many has speculated to be to his cutout person. A cutout person is like, I guess you can say, an intermediary.
Right.
And that call never happened. According to Alvita, two men came into the station, and they were going to be sitting on the phone call and listening in. And when Lee wanted to make the phone call, they denied it. It was going to be a collect call to this person. It turns out that the person that they were making the phone call to was deep into the government, CIA asset, and all these things. Very fascinating story in itself that I had no idea until the last couple of days. What are your thoughts on that?
So Oswald was calling a cutout for sure. His name was John Hurt.
Right.
And there's a lot of obfuscation around this story. So I'll just cut to the real shit. He was attempting to call this person who was definitely a cutout. This guy, John Hurt, had been former Army intelligence, and he was living in Raleigh, North Carolina. Now, naval intelligence is based out of Nag's Head. All right. So the idea is that he was calling John Hurt, and then John Hurt would then call his real handler, right? And so Oswald was basically like, "Hey, I'm in trouble here. What the fuck do I do?" That was kind of the purpose of the call. So many people will link Oswald to CIA, and I kind of link him to CIA, but I don't understand the relationship between naval intelligence and the CIA. There was a lot of overlap. So these guys, it's really hard to say. Like, were there task force where they had multiple agencies working together? Like, who the fuck knows? But an associate of mine believes wholeheartedly that Oswald was not CIA, that he was actually naval intelligence, and he had uncovered who Oswald's handler really was, the guy that John Hurt would have called to connect to Oswald, right? So, and he is in full belief that Oswald was not CIA, that he was naval intelligence. But see, I don't understand the relationship between naval intelligence and CIA well enough to be able to come to that conclusion, because everyone Oswald interacted with was CIA. So did naval intelligence sacrifice one of their own? One of the ideas is that he was dumb enough to bring back a fucking Russian spy with him when he came back from the Soviet Union. So fuck him, right? That's kind of one of the attitudes, because he brought his wife Marina back from the Soviet Union, which was a miracle in and of itself. That was when if you lived in the Soviet Union, you didn't go anywhere, right? You didn't get to leave, no matter what. And so, yeah, it's hard to say. Right. But I don't know. I think the connections to Oswald for naval intelligence, like Fred Korth. Fred Korth was I guess he was a higher up in the Air Force. This is another thing. Like, what's the relationship between the Air Force and naval intelligence? Because Fred Korth was a higher up in the Air Force, but he ended up becoming the head of naval intelligence. And then by the time the assassination happened, he was the Secretary of the Navy, right? But Fred Korth had been a lawyer. And in the 1950s, Oswald's mother, Marguerite Oswald, got divorced from a guy named Ekdahl. Ekdahl, he has some. He's kind of a white Russian. He has some Soviet ties. Some people suspect that he was kind of in on things to some degree with the whole Lee Harvey Oswald defecting to the Soviet Union, but who the hell knows? But Fred Korth, who was the Secretary of the Navy at the time of the assassination, he was Fred Korth's lawyer for the divorce from Oswald's mother. So Fred Korth knew Oswald. He knew the entire family. He knew everything about that family because of the divorce. And then when Oswald wanted to return from the Soviet Union, Fred Korth is the one who facilitated his return. So what does that tell you? I don't know how to interpret that. Another strange coincidence is that Lee Oswald allegedly goes to work at the book depository, where he works under a guy named Roy Truly. Roy Truly was married to Fred Korth's first cousin. Okay, so there's all these connections to Fred Korth. Fred Korth was naval intelligence. So I can buy that Oswald was ultimately naval intelligence, doing work with the CIA. So either explanation works for me. It really doesn't matter because he was definitely handled leading up to the assassination. All the handling was CIA for sure. But see, then you find guys who are like Gaudet. Like Gaudet was definitely CIA. He was a CIA employee. But before that, he was naval intelligence, right? So did they just poach from naval intelligence, or what's the deal there? I really would love to have the time to dig into in the near future.
Right. So I think before I kind of sidetracked you, we were at the movie theater, and having some shady stuff, but which in my opinion again kind of verifies that Lee had no idea what the hell was going on, because like I mentioned earlier,
Now, he was clueless. He was totally clueless. Like,
Yeah.
I think that the evidence for that is that he sat in the movie theater for 40 minutes eating popcorn,
Yeah.
before they arrested him.
Yeah,
So-
someone that just killed the president of the United States, killed an officer, and I'm feeling great. I'm gonna go watch a movie theater. I'm gonna go to the movie theater. Get the hell
Right,
out of
and
here.
that-
It's
and
the
that
most
movie
ridiculous thing.
Here, let me talk about the theater for a minute because it's real interesting. So I know we're kind of jumping all over the place, but it works for me. So basically, the Texas Theater was part of a chain of theaters. There was another theater called the Horowitz Theater down in Houston, and there was the Alabama Theater, which I believe was in Mobile. These theaters were all connected to a network of intelligence owned by Howard Hughes, right, the rich guy in Las Vegas, and the person who was his right-hand man was a guy named Robert Mayu. And Robert Mayu was the guy who, on the books, this definitely happened. He's the one who connected the CIA to Johnny Roselli and that element of the mob back in the 50s, because they wanted to use the mob to try to take out Castro. Now, if anyone believes that they were actually plotting to take out Castro, they're kidding themselves. I will never believe for a split second that we can go in and we can just take out Iraq in a day, but we couldn't knock off this fucking guy on a dinky island right off the coast of our own
100 miles
Give
away
me-
from the Florida coast. Get the hell out
Give
of
me
here.
a fucking break. It's the dumbest story ever. And fortunately, in my research, I have come across a couple guys who've written books and stuff that are like, yeah, this whole trying to kill Castro was a cover for their smuggling operations, because the CIA is the number one trafficker of people, guns, drugs, and all that stuff in the world, right? Forget about street gangs. Like, the CIA controls these industries. And so they were using Cuba as a jump off point for their smuggling to get stuff to get some stuff to Europe and to get other things to Israel and the Middle East. But yes, Castro had to have been in on those smuggling operations. And what better way to maintain him as a smuggling partner than to claim that he's our enemy and we're trying to kill him, right? Like,
Well, and the CIA has been destabilizing governments for decades all over Latin America. They have a crazy track record, even in Ukraine. In 2014, same thing, and yet 100 miles away from the Florida coast, they can't seem to do anything to the Cuban government. I'm not buying that shit for 1 second, man.
yeah, it's a cover story. It's a joke.
Yeah. I'm with
and
you on
so-
that, 100%.
And so, and here's another thing. Let's talk about like the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. The Fair Play for Cuba Committee was the organization that allegedly proved Oswald was a communist, So the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and this is the thing that the history books try to shuffle under the fucking rug, that Castro didn't come out as a communist until December of 1961. Okay, December of 61. The Fair Play for Cuba Committee was started in April of 1960 to be pro-Castro because the Central Intelligence Agency had been working with Castro during, before and during, and subsequently after the Cuban Revolution, when Castro overthrew Batista, which would not have been possible if it wasn't for the CIA funneling him money and weapons and personnel. Right? He had Frank Sturgis and a bunch of these guys who were connected to Kennedy. Ended up being in 58, 59, they were hiding out in the jungles with Castro and his army training these men, right? So the CIA is completely responsible for putting Castro in power, and he didn't really turn on us until late 1961. But the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which is deemed as communist organization, it came up in April of 1960. So what the fuck? How are they a pro-communist, pro-Castro organization in April of 60 if he wasn't a communist until December of 61, right? So you have this 18-month gap here where there's a real gray area. I'm still kind of trying to figure out the mindset of the CIA at the time, but he was not an enemy yet. People involved in the assassination who were also working with Castro. A lot of them had stopped working with Castro in late 59, early 1960, because I believe that they felt that he wasn't living up to what he said he was going to do once the revolution happened. They were starting to suspect he was a communist before he actually came out and said he was a communist, right? So a lot of the Americans who had been working with Castro stopped working with Castro. But and I'm sure that the CIA just sent a new wave of people in to work with him who were pro whatever he was doing, right? Because they needed to keep tabs on him. But yeah, so you have this gap at the Fair Play for Cuba Committee where they're pro-Castro because they believed that he was going to be one of us, right? He was going to be pro-freedom, pro-America, and so let's get the American people on board with Castro and supporting Castro, because even Americans in general don't like us being interventionists, right? They don't want us fucking around in the affairs of other countries, and so it was no different with Cuba. The American people were not really for military action in Cuba, and so I believe the original true purpose of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was to get the American people on board with supporting Castro because he was one of us, right? But then he throws us a curveball, and in December 1961, he comes out as a communist, right? So this whole 18-month period is really kind of it's written out of the history books, right? When you go look up the history of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, they won't mention any of that stuff. All they'll mention is that the purpose of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee is to promote Castro as a communist, and that's what the history books say. But that wasn't the case. Also attributed to having formed the Fair Play for Cuba Committee for many, many years, like 20, 30 years, was a guy named Vincent T. Lee. VT Lee is what they called him. And VT Lee did take over the Fair Play for Cuba Committee post Castro's announcement that he was turning to communism. Okay, but these guys are all working for the CIA. They just do what they're told. And VT Lee was probably not a communist. So, but in reality, in 2005, one of the real founders of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was outed as a CIA spy, a guy named Richard Gibson. And it turns out that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was actually formed by Robert Tabor and Richard Gibson. Both of these guys were CIA contractors. They were working with CBS in New York, right? And so they're working for CBS in New York. They're working out of a newspaper office, and they had some stuff to do on TV. But these guys were the guys who really started the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and the documents that have come out in recent years prove that. Well, in 2005, Gibson gets outed, okay, in some of the JFK releases. So he must have pissed somebody off higher up because they dumped all of his files. He had over 4 fat files, right? That all basically showed that he had been doing spy work. They say from 1965 onward, which would have been after a Fair Play for Cuba Committee, but come on, give me a break. He had been a CIA employee long before that. Operation Mockingbird went up in the 50s, right? And CBS was like the headquarters of that. So CBS was the first to get conquered. Everyone who worked for CBS in the 1950s was working for the CIA, whether they knew it or not. So yeah, so these two guys are white guys from New York, right? They got nothing to do with Cuba, except that they were reporters who had reported on Cuba. So the whole story of Fair Play for Cuba Committee is a whole bunch of bullshit. And it turns out that when those flyers that Oswald was handing out for Fair Play for Cuba Committee, he didn't even have those printed. The whole story is he had them printed because he was a gung-ho communist. Well, it turns out that Kerry Thornley was actually the guy who had them printed. He was picked out of a photo lineup by the guy who printed them as the guy who had them commissioned. And then you have a whole bunch of letters allegedly written from Lee Harvey Oswald to V.T. Lee of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Well, those letters were all fake. There was information in those letters that shouldn't have been. One of the letters was postmarked on August 1st, right? So August 1st, Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly sends a letter to V.T. Lee saying, hey, that he got a P.O. box and he got the flyers printed and all this stuff. However, the problem is that the flyers weren't printed until August 4th. And the problem is that another problem is that he mentions that he got into a fight with Carlos Bernier and these guys on the street, and then he thinks he lost a lot of his support in New Orleans. But that incident didn't happen until August 9th. But it's postmarked in a letter from August 1st, over a week before it, right? So whoever faked these letters, they didn't know what the fuck they were doing, and they included information that shouldn't have been there, right? So any connection that Oswald had to Fair Play for Cuba Committee, we can just erase because it was a CIA front the whole time. And then, so here's the thing with Fair Play for Cuba Committee, once Castro went communist, instead of like closing down the organization, it switched from being a pro-freedom organization to being a pro-communist organization when Castro did, right? Didn't make any sense. Why would any organization do this unless they were a front? Well, I believe that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was actually kept in place as a front, but it was meant to, anyone who got involved with it after that time was definitely a communist, right? So I figured that the CIA thought they could keep tabs on communists by having these pro-communist organizations around, right? Any pro-communist organization that was around the 1960s, I promise, was run by the CIA. And so that's, I think it was like a COINTELPRO kind of thing. So that's my take on the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. But like I said, that is just one piece of this big puzzle that was created to put forth the persona that Oswald was a communist and then he was a dissident and then he wanted to kill JFK. But it doesn't make sense because people were accusing Kennedy of being communist, right? Because he was soft on the Soviet Union, he was soft on Cuba. And so it makes no sense for Oswald as a communist to have wanted to kill JFK. Makes no sense whatsoever.
A fellow comrade, if you will.
Exactly. Exactamundo, right? So there's no logical reason that Oswald would have wanted Kennedy dead. And there's we literally have no information that Oswald had any kind of training with a rifle. So I guess we're going to talk about the rifle now. So the rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano, which actually not called a Mannlicher, that was more of a slang term for it. It was really just a Carcano 6.5 millimeter. And so the Carcano rifle is ordered with a fake money order. Okay, I'm just going to get right to the point so I don't have to give you the long version. The money order that they say Oswald used to buy that rifle was a pure forgery. And we know this because when you look at the money order, it has a stamp on the front with the date on it, right? That stamp bled through to the back side of the paper. But in 1963, those money orders were made on cardstock, not on paper. So the money order is fake. So he couldn't have possibly ordered that rifle with a fake money order. Also, the money order was allegedly deposited when he pulled the bank records, and what Klein's is the company who allegedly sold him the rifle, but I don't believe they ever had that rifle in stock. I believe the paperwork surrounding them having that rifle is all fake. So, because I know where the rifle came from. It came from a company called Adams Consolidated, which was run by a guy named Samuel Cummings, who was a CIA agent, right? So the CIA was connected to that rifle every step along the way. Oswald never owned that rifle. So if Oswald never owned that rifle because the money order was fake and it was delivered from a CIA company, it also went to a P.O. box that had his name, Lee Harvey Oswald, and it had the name of his wife, Marina Oswald, on it. And if your name is not on the P.O. box, the post office will reject that package. They will reject that piece of mail, right? So the name Alec Heidel, which is the name that it was allegedly mailed to, same thing with the revolver, same thing with the communist literature, all mailed to Alec Heidel. All of those pieces of mail would have been rejected at the post office because it did not say Lee Harvey Oswald or Marina Oswald, which were the names on the P.O. box, right? So everything about the rifle is fake. The backyard photographs, okay? The backyard photographs that were allegedly taken by Marina show Oswald posing with the rifle and the handgun. Give me a fucking break. If you're going to kill the president, are you going to let someone take pictures of you posing with the rifle? No, you're not. It's so dumb. Like, it is so dumb.
A primitive Photoshop job.
Primitive Photoshop. And the thing is, the different photos, there's two photos of him posing in two different poses. Photo analysis shows that the head on those photos are identical and they don't match the body. Okay. It's not possible to take two pictures of someone where the exact positioning is identical. There's always variation. And in this case, there wasn't. I mean, honestly, I feel stupid having to explain this stuff because it's so ridiculous. It's so dumb. But people still believe it. People still believe that it was real. And it drives me up a fucking wall. So, yeah, the rifle, the handgun, the communist literature, none of that was Oswald's. Then you have like the 1026 North Beckley boarding house, where allegedly they found all of this stuff where he was living. He wasn't living there either. Kerry Thornley was staying there. So every single thing that you think you know about Oswald was not Oswald. Oswald didn't do any of it. If you want to find activities that Oswald actually did, like when he closed his P.O. box on September 26th in New Orleans, you know that that was the real Oswald because they went to great lengths to suppress that information, right? I am finding all kinds of sightings of Oswald, mostly in the Garrison and the Harold Weisberg files, that to me, there's been such a great effort put into suppressing these statements of witnesses who saw Oswald in different places around the country that I believe that these were real appearances by the person we all know as Oswald, not impersonators. The impersonators were concentrated in New Orleans and in Dallas and Fort Worth. So, yeah, when you find documents that are heavily suppressed, like if you find out that a document didn't appear until the late 1970s, I promise you there's something relevant in there. And documents that came out right away are most likely bullshit. So anything marked top secret that disappeared from the public purview for like over, any amount of time, over a couple of years, you can pretty much guarantee that there is some truth to that stuff. I found all kinds of stuff that definitely disappeared for 10, 20 years and then later came out. And then once it comes out, of course, they have this army of counter propagandists who come out and say, oh, no, this is all nonsense. This is bullshit. That's why it was never released, because it was not true, right? Like, fuck these people.
Yeah. Well,
man, fuck the CIA, man. Fuck the CIA entirely.
Yeah, the whole withholding of the information all these decades later just point to a cover-up. And what are your thoughts on that? My thoughts are the reason why it's still, quote-unquote, a national security issue. Trump was supposed to release a lot of statements. Biden was supposed to release a lot of statements, and none of these clowns ever did. And the reason I'm thinking that they never happened is because some of these people, some of these characters that played a role in this are still alive. What are your thoughts on it?
There are very few who are still alive. There's one guy in particular named Alvin Bobouf, who was a key central. He wasn't one of the plotters. He was a hang-around with David Ferry. He was in Dealey Plaza with David Ferry. And he's still alive just outside of fucking New Orleans. The guy's only 75 years old. He's probably got a couple of years to go. So, yeah, he needs to be confronted because he's one of the few people who has actual information on what really happened. And he was probably involved in the setup on some lower level, but he was definitely there in Dealey Plaza when he was supposed to have been back in New Orleans. He allegedly went on the trip with David Ferry to the ice skating rink. That guy is still alive. Other than that, you have the children of some of these people are still alive. And I think we can find a lot of information from talking to some of these children, like in as far as who Oswald's real handler was, who was in naval intelligence. That information came out because my associate who interviewed him spoke to his son. And people tell their kids things. Yeah.
I mean, with such a huge conspiracy such as this, people are gonna talk. Eventually they're gonna talk, and things get out. And especially after so many decades. I mean, I guess touching back a little bit into the Vita Treon confession, her story only came out because she took notes of the alleged call from, or attempted call from Lee Oswald to his cutout person, and took notes, kept quiet about it, moved to a different state, and then about 10 years later spoke with someone else who encouraged her to speak to the FBI. And that is the only reason we ever knew about this. This was never mentioned in the Warren report or anywhere else. And her story checks out 100%. She was working there. The time, everything correlates. She can back it up. But it's fascinating how not even the Warren report, which was their whole job, was to meticulously dissect this and include every single detail, and yet so many crucial details were left out. And part of the reason, who was one of the people running it? The dullest folks, you know? One of the most corrupt people involved in the whole JFK assassination. The Dulles brothers. And to think that these people have an airport named after them is one of the most ridiculous things, man. These people, the Dulles brothers, were some of the most dirtiest characters ever. Would you mind touching on the Dulles brothers?
Yeah, so the Dulles brothers, I'm not too familiar with Alan Dulles' brother, even though he was a major heavy hitter in intelligence. Dulles is one of the worst human beings that's ever walked planet Earth, period. He's up there with Ben Gurion and James Angleton. But these are the guys who fundamentally created the intelligence, complex, not just in America, but around the world. Like every intelligence agency out there, and there were 17 that popped up in 1947. Dulles had a hand in the creation of all of them and the creation of NATO and all this stuff. And he's the one who cut the post-World War II deal with Reinhard Gehlen, Adolf Hitler's top spy master.
Right.
These guys were like the worst of the worst people. But really, when you look at all their tight connections, they were with various banking groups or entities, right? These guys were one people away connected to the central bankers who control the whole fucking world. So ultimately, the intelligence communities were not built to serve the countries they live in. They were built to serve the banking class. Really, that's what they were all about.
Yeah. So many characters with deep ties, and one of the characters that you brought up to my attention, and I think you're the only one I haven't heard anyone mention, is Mr. Jack Valenti and his whole role in the JFK. How his roles from Hollywood to the president himself, LBJ, and everywhere, his clearances, his high security clearances. No one ever talks about it. You are the only person I have ever heard talk about. Do you mind touching on Mr. Valenti?
Yeah, he was the shooter on the grassy knoll.
There you go.
And there were technically two shooters. You have David Ferry, who did the first shot, but the headshot was by Jack Valenti. And yes, that guy he's the most frustrating figure in my whole fucking life, because I know for fact there is a massive cache of documents and information on his covert life that I have not discovered yet, but that has been rubbed in my face that I haven't discovered it yet by one of my associates. Jack Valenti is a fascinating character, one of the most important people in world history. Besides killing Kennedy, he was the man who ran the MPAA for the Central Intelligence Agency, which controlled Hollywood for over 40 years. So, the CIA controls Hollywood, and Jack Valenti was their representative. But I also believe that he's connected to a whole lot of other people and a whole lot of other assassinations that have gone down. I'm trying to connect him to a couple attempted assassinations that went wrong down in with Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. There was an incident where the CIA attempted to kill Trujillo, and their car got wrecked and it flipped over a bunch of times, right? And I believe that Valenti was in this truck or Jeep that they were in trying to kill Trujillo. Around the same time, Jack Valenti is said to have had a car accident and broke his arm that happened somewhere in Houston, right? So I got these weird, and it's hard to pin down dates and stuff, but I'm trying to link Jack Valenti to a whole bunch of other assassinations. It really makes you look at the life of someone like Chuck Barris, who was from the Gong Show, who came out in life and said he was a CIA assassin and everyone laughed at him. It puts that in a whole different perspective, because Jack Valenti most certainly was a CIA assassin. I'm pretty confident, besides killing Kennedy, he also shot Martin Luther King. That one I still have to get to. But he's the most fascinating and under attributed person in American history. Like, he's done so much. He's directly responsible for creating the rating systems of every movie, right? PG, PG-13, all that stuff. That's his creation. which really means that it was a CIA creation and just another way of censoring, right? So the when you study Jack Valenti and what he did and the controversial stuff he did in the movie industry, that could, you get a whole bunch of books just out of that by itself.
Yeah.
But yeah. So hang on, I'm just reading over the chat.
Oh, they have their weird little things going. Craigie Boy is a she, and loves to talk shit. So I just fuck with him or her.
I want to know who this Ann person is that said I was a bigot.
That's the link that I'll send it to you, bro. It's
right.
it's an old man that wears a muumuu and just sits there on a wooden throne gyrating on a dildo and talking all kinds of shit. You'll laugh, dude. It's pretty. When you see this character, you're gonna lose your shit. But yeah, they got a hold of me doing a podcast with you on YouTube, and they lost their shit over it. So I'm sure they're tuned in. I'm sure this Uncle Terrence character is in there watching, waiting for a slip up, if you will. That way they can call the YouTube police on us.
I hate those fucking people. I hate Karens. Really.
This is that person, Uncle Terrence. I call him Uncle Terrence. Some people call him Ann. And Craigie Boy are the biggest Karens on the internet, and I have fun with them. And that's the thing. This Craigie Boy is just been talking shit this whole time. I believe in free speech. Talk all your shit. I'm not gonna block you. I could block them, and whenever they do streams, I'm not allowed. I'm blocked immediately. They could come here and talk all their shit. I don't care. That's the difference.
And so, just to be clear, like, I kind of go through material really quickly, and I have a very extensive knowledge of the assassination. But like, if anyone thinks that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, I will debate any person on planet Earth in regards to Kennedy. Like,
Yeah.
I will fucking go toe to toe with Eugenio or any of the fucking major shills that are out there who push their bullshit. Any one of them, like, fuck them all. I tell you with certainty, I'm one of one or two people, maybe possibly three people on the planet who have any understanding of what really happened with fucking Kennedy, other than people who were involved who are still alive. And I'll debate anybody on that. So,
yeah. No, and I stand by it, man. That's how we met. You know, I reached out to you. I heard you. I can't remember how I found you. I think I found you on Spotify. Listened to your whole JFK deal, and I was blown away, man. And that's why I asked you earlier, man. How the hell can you manage to remember all these names and characters? I mean, there's so many people involved, so many people, and for you to have that awesome mind capacity to remember all these names, all these events, the times and locations, it's freaking mind blowing, man.
Well, let me break
and
it
my
down
hat's
for
off to you.
Like, everything in Kennedy is really just a series of little events, right? So you've got like the Tippit shooting, you have the Texas Theater incident, you have what happened at the book depository. These are all individual events, and in each individual event, you're not talking more than like 3 or 4, maybe 5 people tops per each one of these small events. So when I study these events, I just come to understand, the gist of what happened and who was involved. And then over the course of, I'm going on almost 4 years of hardcore research now.
Yeah.
After a while, it's like, it's like watching all the cartoons from when you were a kid. I bet you could name most of the characters on most of the cartoons that you watched when you were a kid. It's just, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But to me, there's an overwhelming drive and passion to understand what happened. And it took me years for me to be able to say, I understand what happened, and I do. Right. The things that I'm looking for now in Kennedy are so fucking deep down the rabbit hole that there are no other Kennedy researchers on the planet.
No one's talking about it. And that's what I want people to understand. You're the only one making these connections. And when it comes to your book, if you don't mind giving us a little sneak peek onto what you plan on writing about. I'm not saying tell us what your book is, because we're obviously going to purchase it and buy it, but just a little glimpse into what's in the works.
So basically, there's really 2 points to my book. The first thesis, so to speak, is that none of the things people think Oswald did Oswald actually do, and that he's mostly a complete construct. Then the other part of the book, where it's all it's not in two separate parts. It's all kind of blended together. But the other focus of the book is identifying the shooters, and putting weapons in their hands, and identifying like their handlers and that kind of stuff. And I'll do a little bit of background on Israel's involvement, and Permindex and CMC and some of the companies involved. But I'm trying to keep the backstory stuff really minimal, because I'm going to eventually write books about that stuff in detail. Yeah. So I'm kind of this thing that sucks. I feel like I'm brushing over a lot of things that I mention and talk about, like with Gaudet and stuff, but I don't go into like 50 pages on Gaudet, right? I can't. If I went into all the backstory of everything I wanted to talk about, the book would be 3,000 fucking pages. I can't do that. I'm trying to write a nice 300 to 400 page book that basically proves to people that Oswald was not even Oswald, and that who the shooters were, and how I put together because really, when you look at who the shooters were, all of them were connected to David Ferry. And especially the Daltex and the book depositories, you have 4 shooting positions, or 5 technically. You've got the Daltex building from the fire escape, and people talk about people being on the roof of like the jail building or the county records building, and that's all fluff. That didn't happen. When you look at the position of the shooters, they had to avoid trying to hit the crowd, because the crowd, well, I'm not going to talk about the crowd, but a huge portion of that crowd knew Kennedy was going to get killed, and they were there for ritualistic purposes, right? So they couldn't hit anybody in the crowd. So to think that there was somebody on the other side of the limousine, meaning like the grassy side and like towards the southern side, right? Like, no, they would not have shooters there, because if they missed, they would hit somebody in the crowd. They couldn't afford to do that. So all the shooters are in like a crescent between the Daltex and the grassy knoll. Right?
Are you going to have any like diagrams? Are you planning on that, or?
I don't know. I'm thinking about it. Maybe I'll have like a separate. I'm thinking about letting everybody download my notes for like $10 or something like that.
Yeah.
Because
and you do have a buy me a coffee account, right?
So here's what I'm doing with that. So I have a buy me a coffee account. It's me and Chris at Forbidden Knowledge News. It's buy me a coffee / forbidden, or you can go to supportfkn.com. But there, I'm posting all kinds of stuff in regards to like my sources. I'm posting exclusive. I'm going to probably end up doing a couple exclusive podcasts that I'll post there. But we're broke, and we do this full time, right? Me and Chris don't have real jobs. We do this full time, and we produce a fuck ton of content. So anybody wants to make a donation through Buy Me a Coffee will get access to a chat room where they can chat with me directly and ask me questions about the book and all the stuff here. Plus, they'll get access to like a whole bunch of my sources and a bunch of other great information. So yeah, I highly encourage people to go and give us money. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah, 100%, man. And the amount of dedication, the amount of time you've poured in, I don't think the average person realizes it or takes that into consideration. So
no, if I didn't work for myself from home and do I've been working in content since 2016. This is how I've made my living since 2016, doing podcasting and mostly back-end stuff, technical stuff, websites, podcast distribution. Like I do all that stuff on the back end.
Yeah.
And so that basically gave me the freedom to do my research. Because if I had to work a 9-to-5 job, come home exhausted every day, I would not be reading anything.
That's me right now, my man. I'm working 60, 70 hours a week. And this is why
I bet you make a whole lot more money than I do. I guarantee you that much.
Well,
lately we've been just barely scraping by. Really, it's been frustrating. I know. The amount of time and effort we put into producing content to be able to pay your bills and then be broke all month kind of sucks.
Oh, I understand it. I definitely understand it, and people don't realize the amount of work that goes into it. It's not just research, and it's not just hitting that record button and then doing that. It's retaining it, editing, and then distributing. There's so much work that goes into it, and this is what I brought up earlier: the way that you can rattle off names, give the background, give the dates, locations. I mean, that's a skill in itself, man. I've been looking into this, and I couldn't regurgitate the information that you do, man. I don't have that talent. You do have a special talent, man. So
so I was a cop for almost 9 years, before I did this. So I understood the investigative process, and so for me, putting the pieces together on this, I think it was easier for me than a lot of other people who've tried to do this.
Yeah, 100%. You did have that skill set that I'm sure helped you out along the way.
But I'm really looking forward to finishing my book because I need there are my to-do list as far as research goes just keeps stacking up. There's other things I need to dig into. I need to go back and revisit World War II all over again. So I'm anxious to finish my book and then take like a year and dive back into 1933 to 1945, the Nazi army and the Republic and all that stuff. I need to really come to get a firmer grasp on that because the players involved in the Kennedy assassination were most certainly involved in crafting many of the stories that came out of World War II. And so yeah, there's other things I need to look into. I have a stack of books I need to read, and I need to get my book out first before I can even start that stuff.
When are you shooting for the release of that book? You said around June or July?
I'm going to finish it in July, hopefully July.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, like I've rewritten my Oswald chapter 3 times. So I got through it, and then I'm like, oh well, I need to add this. And then while I'm adding more stuff, I'm like, well, that doesn't sound right. Let me change it. And I ended up rewriting that chapter 3 times. It took me about 2 weeks total to produce my Oswald chapter with all the rewrites. So if I'm looking at 2 weeks per chapter, I'm probably looking at 20 chapters. It's 40 weeks. I've already got 6 chapters written. I need to start getting my 2 week per chapter down to a week per chapter. And so, yeah, but I'm hoping to get it out by July. I'm hoping to finish by July, get it edited by August, and released by September.
If you need a audiobook voiceover, man, just hit me up.
I thought about that too, because I will do an audiobook. I'll read the chapters myself. I might even actually pay money to go to a studio to record it instead of doing it in my house, so it's perfect, Yeah,
man, that dude, I'm looking forward to it, man, and feel privileged to have gotten to know you, man. Like I mentioned the very first time we met, dude, I was trying to hunt you down, and luckily, shout out to Charlie Robinson, I was able to hunt you down that way. But yeah, it's been awesome, and I know how much time and effort you put into the work. And anyone listening to this, you can hear the passion in Cory's voice and sense it. So
this
he
is the
definitely
most
puts in
fucking
a lot of
important event in world history. This makes the world wars pale in comparison. This makes everything pale in comparison because it gave control of the world to a particular group of people who have been fucking raping us ever since. And so,
what do you think about John Barber?
I like John Barber. I know John Barber.
Yeah,
I've met him. I launched his podcast for him. So yeah, but John doesn't talk to me anymore. Once I bring up who, people stop talking to me, and so
yeah,
he was 100%. One of many people who I did a lot of work for, and then he was just like, "I'm out," But
you can only speak the truth, man. At the end of the day, and some people can take it, some people can't. It's just
I'm banned on like every goddamn JFK forum and Facebook group and all that stuff. Like, as soon as I start coming up and showing my evidence and putting out answers, they're like, "Oh, we don't want to hear it."
Cognitive dissonance, man.
The cognitive dissonance. The JFK research community are a bunch of fucking frauds. Like all of them, they're a bunch of fucking amateurs. Don't understand what the fuck they're doing. Don't understand the investigative process, and then they come up with some great data. Like the data the JFK research community has come up with has been phenomenal, but not a single fucking one of them has connected any dots on any of it.
Yeah.
Period. You got to, at some point, you got to put your foot down and you got to say, "Hey, this is what happened," and that's exactly what I did. So.
Right. Man, awesome stuff. Do you think we missed anything on Lee Oswald?
We missed like 99% of it, but that's, we don't have a year to do a podcast. So
no, I understand. But I know we're hitting up on almost 2 hours here. I could go on the whole damn night, but I know it can be exhausting, man, and especially with you spitting out the information the way you do off the top of your head. I'm trying to think of any questions that I had beforehand. Like I said, we did cover the Alveda Treon angle, which to me was fascinating. You did mention there was a second call though. So
yeah, there's another call to Oswald's real handler, but I can't prove it. I just know the person who spoke to Oswald's handler's son and confirmed all the information. But none of it's verifiable, but I know it to be true. So Bill Maher. I don't watch Bill Maher, but he does have this funny segment on his show that's like, I can't prove it, but I just know it to be true, right? Like, I don't know that Michael Jackson molested kids. I just know it to be true, right? So it's the same thing with there's a lot of Kennedy stuff that I know for fact happened, but I can't prove it. I just know it to be true, right? Just based on the totality. And so I kind of steer away from talking about stuff like that because just because I understand that's what happened, don't have the ability to prove it.
And it's good though that you veer away from that speculation. You pretty much weigh in on stuff that you definitely feel confident and can back up. And to me, that's bigger than anything else, man. Too many damn people just speculate and just speak out of their ass. So,
right. And like, if I'm gonna put some stuff out there, like if I'm gonna say, and I'm the only person on the planet who's ever said this, if I'm gonna say that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't work at the book depository, I better have a damn good reason for saying that, you know?
Yeah.
And I can lay out all the data that I have that it would indicate that. But
right.
yeah, there's certain things I know that I just can't prove, and I don't feel comfortable saying because I can't prove it, you know.
Now back just real quick on that. How many aliases have you been able to track down for Harvey Lee Oswald? How many body doubles or triples or quadruples do you think he had in your research?
Well, that's an interesting question because, like, and I've avoided today talking about the work of John Armstrong. John Armstrong was a guy who came out with a book called Harvey and Lee. That it's a very controversial book because a lot of his conclusions were just dead wrong, but the data he gathered was just unfucking believable, mind-blowing. So it turns out they had been impersonating Oswald going back to 1947 when he was only like 8 years old. And John Armstrong did a phenomenal job of laying out all the conflicting school records. You know, this proof that we have actual documents showing that he was at two different schools and this during the same time in New York in like the 1952-1953 school year. It's crazy. We have different descriptions of two different boys who are both called Lee Harvey Oswald. This all goes back to John Armstrong's work. If you go to harveyandlee.net, he lays out all of this stuff there. Now, this data that he gathered is phenomenal, but the conclusions he drew from that data are just fucking garbage. And so it's very frustrating for me to talk about his work because I have to explain the data is good, but his conclusions are bad, right? Like every single, so he determined that there were, in fact, two boys growing up as Lee Harvey Oswald post 47 up until the time they went off to the Marines. And I agree with him 100%. The data is like, the data and the testimony of people he's interviewed, like that you can watch the videos of on YouTube, like just prove it beyond all doubt that there was a second boy named Lee Harvey Oswald who had a second mother named Marguerite Oswald, and that this other mother and son shadowed the real Lee Harvey Oswald and the real Marguerite Oswald. They was in their shadow forever. But he attributes every single duplicate Oswald to this other person, right? This original duplicate Oswald, and that is where his theories fall apart. So when you get to like post his defection to the Soviet Union, I can prove that Kerry Thornley and William Seymour and Larry Crawford were impersonating Oswald in different places. So it takes his conclusions that it was this other duplicate Oswald that was attributed to all the other, duplicate Oswald sightings. That's where he just fell off the fucking deep end. But yes, there were a bunch of people. There were people who would like go to a meeting at a hotel and they would sign the logbook, the check-in book, Lee Harvey Oswald, but then nobody ever saw Lee Harvey Oswald there. So I have no doubts they had some people just going and filling out paperwork saying that they were Lee Oswald when Lee Oswald was never there,
Right. Someone's asking, was he a twin?
That would make my fucking day. That would be perfect because that would completely reinvigorate the work of John Armstrong, and that would make a lot of sense. But we just don't know. We just don't have any information on that. It's a distinct possibility. Distinct possibility. But we don't
hadn't
have
heard that
angle.
Yeah,
like no one's really focused. Nobody's even tried to show that. Well, here's the thing, though, because if there was, I would lean against that because, and I'll say this because one of the Oswalds, one of the two Oswalds who had used the name Lee Harvey Oswald was most certainly an English as a second language student, right? Because he spoke when people met Oswald in Russia, they thought he was fucking Russian because he spoke perfect, fluent Russian. And you know how, like, it's not possible. If you're an American, you'll never ever learn Russian and then get confused as a Russian, because the nuances of the language are so difficult that unless you grew up speaking that language, you're not ever going to come off as a fully fledged Russian speaker, right? They'll
Yeah.
always be able to pick you out, but not with Oswald. When Oswald gets to Russia, everyone he met thought that he was Russian because he
God
spoke
damn.
perfect fluent. Yeah. So that tells me that it's more likely the duplicate Oswald when he was a kid was probably plucked out of some Eastern Bloc country, who spoke fluent Russian, raised in America, and then that would coincide with the aims of the AE Balcony program, right? AE Balcony wanted to use naturalized Americans who spoke fluent languages of Eastern Bloc countries. If Oswald was taken from an Eastern Bloc country, raised in America, when he's put back in the Soviet Union, of course he would speak completely fluent Russian. No one would ever be able to tell the difference. But these are all subjects that I haven't figured out yet, and I always feel strange talking about them because while I know there is some truth to it, I also know that I probably don't have the whole picture, and nobody does, right? So,
Yeah.
but spending time on Oswald, like I really don't want to spend a lot of time on Oswald because, as far as the assassination goes, he's completely irrelevant.
Yeah. Did you look at the comment there by Demelza? I've got a weird story about my FIL. I'm not sure what FIL means. And Lee Harvey Oswald with photos. It's very strange. What the hell? Demelza, get in touch with me. I want to know what the hell this is about. And I'm sure you would, right, Cory? She's
anybody. This is how history is reborn, right? Because people realize that, hey, my dad told me this story when I was a kid, and now I think it's relevant, and it's like modern day, right? This is how pieces of history get revived.
Well, that's how that Alvita Treon story was. She kept notes. She kept it for 10 years, never told anyone. And then 10 years later, oh, by the way, I was I was working the switchboards when Lee attempted his last final call. And that's how history was made. But she never told anyone. And so Demelza, reach out to me. Demelza is a longtime subscriber, so I'm sure she'll get a hold of me. But I'm more than interested in hearing what you have to say about that. 100%. There was another question that I had. What was it? Oh, one of the kind of weird connections that a lot of people seem to miss and don't connect is the Bush connections to the Kennedy assassination. With the Zapata and all that good stuff. Is there any way we can get a brief little coverage on that?
Yeah, definitely. George Bush was in Dallas, in Dealey Plaza, for sure.
And he has denied that he was ever CIA, even though the evidence proves otherwise, right?
Oh yeah, he was CIA going way back, but he wasn't like an agent. He was more of a financier. Like him and his Prescott Bush, they controlled banks, and I mean that's kind of where the CIA. Anybody who runs a bank has a CIA contact. That's just how it is.
Right.
And so those guys had so many connections because of their banking that it would be stupid not to have people like him in there. I don't believe he ever did. He wasn't a spy or didn't do any covert work or anything like that. But he was a financier of a lot. And so, but no, he was certainly in Dallas. We have a letter from his wife, Barbara Bush, who she sent to family that ended up in the archives somehow. And basically she says, we flew into Dallas and I went and got my hair done. And after the assassination, George came and rushed me in. We went to this little airport. We got on a private plane. We flew to Dallas we flew to Fort Worth from Dallas, where Love Field is. And then we caught a commercial flight back to Houston. So yeah, I mean, he was there for sure. A lot of the pictures that people say are George Bush in Dealey Plaza are not. There's one picture in particular of George Bush. It looks like George Bush straight up, but when you look at it from a different angle, it turns out that it was actually a detective named H.H. Davis. So all the pictures that people say are George Bush in Dealey Plaza are not, but he was definitely there because everybody was there. It was like they all needed to watch. Like you have CIA guys flying in from Italy, like particularly William Harvey. I mean, he caught a flight from Italy in Rome to Dallas just so we could go watch. All of the Mossad guys were there. I'm telling Angleton and Ted Shackley and George Ioannidis and all of those guys were there. Then you've got David Morales, who I'm not going to say where David Morales was, but David Morales was directly connected to the Grassy Knoll shooter. And I've got him, finally, I found him in a clear picture of him in a photograph in Dealey Plaza. So yeah, all the guys were there. They had to see. they even flew assassins in from all over the world, from France, the Corsican assassins that Hank Albarelli talks about in his new book. They were most certainly there. They were just not shooters. So yeah, it was
huge
crazy.
event. Yeah, with so many players, and that just seems to make sense. And I think, in that same spirit of what you're describing, just a huge event, so many people were called in, and just like Harvey Harvey, I think most of them didn't know exactly what was going to go down. You know what I mean? And that's where I see Lee Oswald in that same category. He probably knew something was going down, and he was laying down the groundwork, but had no idea that everything was going to be pinned on him. Poor bastard. Yeah, just a huge event, and this is why we know that the official story doesn't make sense, because so many loose ends, so many sloppy things were left for people to uncover later on. They didn't cover up their tracks as
well. They were sloppy, and they didn't have an
Yeah.
internet, and they didn't understand the concept that one day all of the data surrounding everything they did would be able to be accessed in one place from your home in front of your fucking computer.
Yep.
Never in a million years could they have imagined something like that. And that's obvious. They figured that, hey, if we can suppress this for a couple of years, it's enough for people to be able to come up with counter propaganda and challenge anything that eventually leaks out. So yeah, they didn't understand the depths of which information would flow in the future, and that's pretty much what it came down to. That's why they failed.
Yeah, it's very interesting stuff. Cory, you joined me for going on 2 hours. I could keep going, but I know you get.
Yeah, after 2 hours, like I start to fall apart.
Yeah, I know that, man. Let's remind everyone, where can they find you? CoryHughes.org, but
CoryHughes.org. But everyone needs to go to Odysee and go to my channel. The channel is the real story of the Kennedy assassination. It's kind of fucking long, but it is what it is. And when you go there, watch my video. It's 7 hours long. I explain the entire assassination. It's called A Warning from History, which will be the title of my book as well. But that's available right now. You can go watch that for free on Odysee. It's a chunk of information, and I talk just as fast as I talked here today. So, there's probably 14 hours of information in it. But not everyone needs to see that, and go to CoryHughes.org. And if you want to get access to my chat and to a whole bunch of exclusive stuff, you can go to buymeacoffee/forbidden, and that will get you access to all kinds of stuff related to my book.
Sweet. And you also have a couple of podcasts. Let's remind people.
Yes. I always forget about these. Like the big one to tune into is Understanding Propaganda. I don't know. I think I'm up to like 35 episodes.
I've been on a couple of them with you. God damn it.
Yeah, and we should do another one this week, because I need to do a fresh one. The last couple of weeks I've put up a bunch of interviews I did on Kennedy, but I go into the history of propaganda, what propaganda is all about, and I try to teach people to spot propaganda, so they can tell that everything that they are come to learn about everything is bullshit.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Understanding Propaganda, and also Day Zero on Sundays with Charlie Robinson. I do that every week with Charlie Robinson and Lindsay Sharman and Chris Matthew from Forbidden Knowledge News. It's like a panel discussion, and it's a hoot and a holler. So turn out for that. That one we do on that's
Sundays.
Streamed live on Rockfin, and it ends up on Rumble and all those stuff. So
yeah. And I've joined you guys in there as well. We do a lot of cock and ball jokes there. It's a good time. My man, Cory, thank you so much, man. A lot of minds were blown. And again, it's pretty easy to see as soon as you listen to Cory, with the amount of information that he just spits out. And you don't even stutter, nothing. It's, you just boom, 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 boom. Thank you, ma'am. I don't know. I just fucked that up, but whatever.
Wham, bam, thank you, man.
Wham, bam, thank you, bam. All that good jazz. But you spit it out. You've been studying this in depth. So check them out, CoryHughes.org. And this is the G of G's. Thank you again, Cory.
No problem.
All right, my man. Take care. All right. That was Cory Hughes, y'all. let me know in the chat if you guys want to go to Odysee and we could take some calls. If you guys are still up for it. And Demelza, if you want to share some of that information on Odysee, I'll put the StreamYard link in there and you can talk us through it. Or you can message me as well. That would be awesome that's awesome information to get. Simpsons hands, if you guys want to take this to Odysee, and if we get enough Simpsons hands, you will just have to give me 5 minutes so I can set it up for Odysee, and we'll take it there. Yeah, awesome conversation by the one, the only, the legendary Mr. Cory Hughes. Find him out at coryhughes.org. Let's give some shout outs, goddammit. Raziel, Heaven Sent, DJ Mossy, Demelza, Roscoe, Sunflower, happy birthday, Miss Empress. Hell yeah, I hope you fucking smashed it. Amy Wright, fuck yeah. Shout out to Heather, trying to cause and stir the pot. Accusing me of deleting and blocking. How the hell did I block you when you're still making all these comments all this time later? Your comments were just deleted. It wasn't me, by the way, but I think it's funny. You were probably crossing some lines, and I will not second guess my mods. So if they felt like deleting your comment, then you you deserved it at the end of the day. George O'Brien, Old School Pete's. Who else we got up in here? Secret Squirrel, Alex Hoyle. All right, y'all. Oh, we are seeing some Simpsons hands. Demelza, let me know. Let's see. Sorry, I might try to get it cleared up too. It may take a couple of days, but I defo will. I'd love to know what you guys think of it. Can you call in, Demelza? If you want to call in, we'll do a stream on Odysee and have you call in 100%. Let's see. I'm just waiting on you guys. Like I said, the biggest thing, if we get it, a little group, a little army that's willing to go at Odysee, we'll take it over there. I'm just going to need a few minutes to set up the stream over there. Let's see. I think I'm too shy to come on live. Don't be shy. It's just a phone call. I'm sure you make phone calls every goddamn day. That's all you got to look at it. It's a phone call between two individuals. You being the responsible adult and me making the cock and ball jokes. But just a phone call. That's how you got to look at it. It's no big deal. All right. Let's see here. All right. Looks like we got enough Simpsons hands for a little mini Odysee stream. Let's do it. I will put the StreamYard link in the Odysee. And Demelza, please call in. I truly want to hear your personal take. I mean, this is historic stuff if you got some personal connections to it. So don't keep it in. Let us know. All right, y'all. It is 11 past the hour. Let us shoot for 25 minutes past the hour, and that will give me time to set up the stream. Thank you so much. Hope you guys enjoyed it. For all the YouTubists, Odysee's where it's at, though. We had to tone it down a little bit here, but on Odysee we can get a little more frisky. All right, y'all. I will see you at 25 minutes past the hour.